Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Corey and Veronica here. I'm going to pull up the slides for today's presentation. Again, I appreciate you all for being here and for taking the time this afternoon. I know that it is summer and not always the best time to meet. And let me just pull these up here. Y'all should are probably seeing too much of my screen. Could have done this before I started. Here we go. Veronica, can you see that?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, cool. Well, all right, everybody. Thank you again for coming. Again, we know it's summer and not always the best time for a webinar, but we do think that this is an interesting time to have this conversation around ADA accessibility. Veronica and I were talking before we got on the phone. It was just a few short months ago, Veronica, where we thought we were all going to have all of our documents accessible by a certain date. I think to some degree of fortune, that deadline got pushed back, and it's helped a little bit with us to take sort of a step back, to take a breath, and think about accessibility and what it means strategically for our districts as opposed to reactively. So before we get going, I just want to know if you have any thoughts or wanted to comment on that, Veronica.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost a blessing in disguise. We were really rushing to make sure that we were meeting some of these compliance deadlines. But the beauty is, with everything we had going on in the spring, we have graduations, we have end of year retirement events, we've got transitions of leadership, all kinds of things were eating up our bandwidth. And so now we get a chance to be strategic. We can work smarter, not harder, and really analyze what tools we need to address some of these big initiatives that we have. So time is on our side this time, but we can't let it slip away too much because then we're going to be right back to where we are. So let's work smarter, not harder.
Yeah, I mentioned to Veronica, and I think it's worth noting, the deadline shifted, which is great, but the requirements haven't. We still have to make sure organizationally that we have a plan for how we are going to create ADA document accessibility for our students, for our staff, for our community members. Today, we're going to be talking a lot about those pesky PDF documents, right, that hang off of your website. It's funny because you don't always think about those documents. If you ask your website provider, for example, they might say, oh, we've got the website covered, the pages are accessible, this or that. But there is not always a process for how you garden your
Mhm.
website for those PDF documents. They're often being uploaded to the tune of a dozen or 100 a day. And you aren't always aware of them. So this is going to give you a solution to think about those documents. Again, it's going to give you, if you look at the slide here, a little bit more time to think about those documents. We're talking about, again, those PDFs in particular. You'll see on the slide it says websites, which I just mentioned, and of course applications to those things I know you all are thinking about as well. Again, all districts are still responsible for meeting this. It's just going to give us, thankfully, a little bit more time to do it. So I hope if you're on the call and you're listening, maybe you're taking a breath now, and that's good. We're going to show you and talk to you a little bit about what to do with the time that you have and how to approach this responsibly. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a solution that we think can help save you some time and some resources along the way.
Yeah. And Corey, as you're changing slides, I just want to reiterate a lot of school districts, we transitioned between website providers and we're like, yeah, we're good. My website provider took care of it. But I know Corey mentioned it. It's just very important. The sites might be ADA compliant, but the PDFs that everyone's been uploading since you transitioned may not be. And so that's the thing that I think most school comms and school marketing folks are not paying enough attention to. And we're finding ourselves in a boat where we need to start making some changes.
Yeah, we were mentioning too at the outset, the whole debate that's going on right now around educational technology in schools and screen time in schools. And I was talking to Veronica about how, it's almost like we need to bifurcate this debate, right? There is all of the classroom stuff that needs a heavy lens toward how do we evaluate this. And then there's all the back office administrative stuff, which also needs a heavy lens to how we evaluate it. But the questions might be a little bit different. And so we're going to talk, if you guys are thinking about that or hearing about it, we're going to talk a little bit about that too. What questions should I be asking of my solution, right? Security and this and that versus over on the other side in the classroom, what questions should I be asking? So, again, the deadlines are up on the screen here. Just wanted to reiterate there is sort of a difference depending on the size of your community. If you are a public entity serving 50,000 or plus, which I know there are a lot of large districts in Texas and other places, I know a lot of you folks are in large districts. That's going to be April 26, 2027. If you serve a community of under 50,000, that is actually going to be April 26, 2028. So even a little more time beyond that. Now, again, if you're serving under 50,000, you probably have a smaller team. So you might need to get going a little bit quicker as a result of that. But just know that you do have some time. Know also that when it says community population,
Yeah.
we need to think about what that means, right, B? Because it's not just the number of students
Nope.
you serve.
Nope, nope. I've had school districts reach out and say, oh, well, we only have 20,000 students. Well, you only have 20,000 students, but that's not what it says. It says your population, the community you're served. So we can get into more detail about that. I know Corey's got some expertise in that, but it's not your district it's not the number of students that you have enrolled. It's the community in which you serve. So that's a very clear distinction. That's a misnomer in this space.
Thanks for pointing that out, but yeah, and I would say like if you're unsure, that's a point where you might want to ask your legal team or ask the team that's working on this project to kind of think through that a little bit so that you can make a determination. All right, so what the rule requires, if you were on our previous call, the rule hasn't really changed. I'm just going to reiterate it here. Right, again, it's those websites we talked about, the PDFs, which is what we're going to focus on today, and those applications. You'll see the WCAG 2.1 Level 2A. I know that's a lot of jargon, but that's what you're going to see all over the place. That is the standard that they are looking to get compliance toward or get compliant toward. We're going to show you our solution, which gets you 90+% of the way there in most cases, which as a good faith effort usually is enough to carry you through. And then we're also going to show you the delta on that when you need to get more than 90x%, how you do it and how it can be done with the use of a solution like the one we're going to show you. Keep in mind, friends, this applies to, a lot of stuff that I know there's a communications folks on the call. I know there's some superintendents on the call, stuff that you see all the time, but you might not be thinking about, oh, this needs to be compliant, right? Those board materials. We know how important board meetings are. We know how important those board minutes are. And we know that a lot of community members outside of our schools ask for those types of materials. Same thing with policies. Oh, and forms. I mean, every,
Mm.
we're in summer now, but I think that as we head back toward the school year, we know how many forms are going to be filled out across our community. Those SPED documents, right? And of course, those public communications. Be anything to say about that? I know that's a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I can feel people in the call like that's a lot of documents. It is a lot of documents, and there's a lot of departments that are responsible for those documents. So as Corey and I get through this, you're going to be able to see where it may not all fall on you, depending on the way your district is structured. But this is going to be important for your curriculum folks, your business folks, your operation folks, facilities planning PDFs. Some of these facility planning PDFs are 400 pages long. They are not all your responsibility, but we're going to help you point everybody in the right direction to make sure we're all in compliance.
Yeah, I wrote down here accessibility is ongoing. It's not a one-time
Yeah.
project. If you felt like a deer in headlights before they pushed this deadline back, and now I've shown you this slide and you're feeling like a deer in headlights again, just know we constantly have this conversation and you do not need to do everything at once. In fact, I think the beauty of the time that we've been given is that you may actually find that there's a lot of stuff that you can take down off of your
Yes.
website, right? So that you don't have to make those documents compliant. And that alone could save you a tremendous amount of cost as well as a lot of hair pulling. So this is as much about gardening, right, as it is about applying sort of a new solution to, a difficult and sort of, time-bound challenge.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does this extension really mean? Again, I kind of hit on this at the beginning. Going Good news is we don't need to necessarily rush. I would say like you do need a plan. I think that like school districts find themselves in this place often, which is like we want to plan, but then we have a lot of fires that crop up along the way, and planning for other things kind of gets pushed to the side as we deal with the things that are right in front of us. Um, you know, if you do that, it's probably going to sneak up on you, don't you think, V?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't let it go much longer. Yeah.
Those, but why? Because those backlogs are probably growing every day. I mentioned, those documents that get uploaded to your website, those PDF, those pesky PDF documents that you probably aren't even aware are there in a lot of cases. So, the problem hasn't paused or gone away. And I just wanted to note too, I said this on another one of these events that I was on in a different part of the country, but accessible access is still the goal. I don't know if any of you know my story, but I'm someone with cerebral palsy, and I came up in the public school system in Maryland, in Howard County, Maryland. And the story I always tell is I had a tremendous public school experience, so much so that I didn't even really think about my disability. I played a sport in high school, lacrosse, and people would come to me after games to interview me, and they wanted to interview me because, I was out there doing this thing. And I didn't really realize why they wanted to talk to me. I didn't play very much, right? I wasn't scoring a lot of goals, but they thought it was cool that I was out there. But the reason that I didn't put two and two together is because I didn't see my disability as something. And the reason for that is because I always had folks around me who were giving me extra support, who were helping me think through things like how do I carry my backpack? How do I go up and down stairs? How do I go through doorways? And so it just didn't register for me. And I think like that's the place you want to get to in your school community and with your students is that if they have a challenge or a need, because their need is being met almost in an invisible way to them,
Mhm.
they aren't thinking about it. And because they're not thinking about it, they're able to learn at pace and on track with the rest of their friends and, have the experience like I did. So anyway, I just put that out there. I don't know if that's something that you talk about from a communications lens, but it's certainly something that personally I have felt and I've seen. And one of the reasons that I wanted to be a part of this conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of us have it written our strategic plans. It's part of our board governance is equitable and access, and we use words that sometimes we're not quite sure how to bring to life inside the operations at what we do. And it's regardless of compliance, it's still the right thing to do for kids. And we only exist as school systems so that students have access to an education that's going to help them go further in life. And I think it's still at the end of the day not just about compliance, it's about the students.
Yeah, well said, well said. So let's look about it. It kind of goes right into what we just said. That was not planned, by the way,
No.
friends. But inaccessible documents they don't just block students, but they also block families, right? That's a challenge for a lot of reasons. I think there was an OCR complaint, and I forget the state now. Oh gosh, I want to say it was Ohio, but I don't want to get it wrong. Just know that there was a particular complaint that I was looking at. It was a $250,000 judgment, and the judgment was because a guardian of a child, right, could not access the homework documents that they needed in order to be able to support that child. Now, the district tried to make a good faith effort in order to make those documents accessible. It took like something like 3 months, which was too long. And
Mhm.
in between that time, the lawsuit was advanced. And when they asked the woman why she advanced the lawsuit, even though she did eventually receive the document, she said, because it's not really about the money or it's not really about the time. It's just about wanting to bring attention to this issue. And I think you're going to have people in your community who, if they get frustrated or they don't feel like their needs are being met, they're going to want to bring attention to the issues. So the way to resolve that is from the front end, right? To make
Yeah.
sure that documents are not being blocked, to make sure if a document is inaccessible, and you're going to find that you're quickly able to make that document through a good faith effort accessible. And that's
Mhm.
what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Why? Because accessibility builds trust. Let's talk about trust for a second, V, and why that's so important.
And if For anyone who has worked with me, it's probably the one thing I talk about the most. In public education, we're either earning trust or eroding trust. It's binary. There's nothing in between. So anytime we think about going to the voters to ask for a proposition to be passed, an increased tax rate, whatever it may be, the first thing that they're going to do is let their subconscious drive whether or not their instincts trust the system. So if they've had blocked documents, if there is a lot of sped conversations in that community where the perception is that the district doesn't partner with families, then that trust has been eroded and it's going to be a flat no. So I always tell people the best way to earn trust is to make sure that people have access to names, numbers, and most importantly, resources for students.
Yeah. You see, I wrote at the bottom here, legal requirement not in bold, plus community expectation in bold. Sure, there is a legal requirement. This does kind of shine a light on the deadline, but that community expectation in bold is always there
Yeah.
and will always be there. So hopefully we can use that as our lens as we go through this conversation today. Okay, so the reality for most districts, if you're on this call, you're probably again thinking, oh, there's a lot to do. And that is true. We have a little bit more time to do it. Thousands of PDFs created by people over many years. Now, remember what I said at the outset, because this is probably the most important thing you can take away. Because of the extra time we have, that means we actually have time to take a look at our documents and determine which ones we want to share publicly and which ones maybe we want to take down. And then once we've determined that, we can start to make a plan for what's a priority level 1 document, what's a priority level 2 document, what's a priority level 3 document, what are we just not going to touch. And I think when you start to think about it through that lens, oh, this does. I can feel the air leaving the room already. I mean, like coming into the room already. It's a good feeling when you have a plan. Limited staff time and limited accessibility expertise. I don't know how many of you have actually tried to convert documents manually for accessibility. I used to be a technology reporter. I've sat behind people and watched them convert documents manually. It is an arduous, to say the least,
Yes.
process, and it takes a lot of time. In some cases, one page could take, an hour or more, depending on the depth at which you could go with that. And so, having a solution, which we're going to show you in a minute, that not only gives you accessibility, right, but also gives you your time back so that you can use that time to do other more important things in your district. I think that's a very fascinating conversation. And I know, as we
Mhm.
said at the outset, there's a big debate around technology and AI in particular in the classroom and technology and AI in schools. And I do think that like a little bifurcation is necessary between those two debates. We need to ask a lot of questions about what's going on with that technology in the classroom. We need to
Mhm.
ask a lot of questions about what's going on with that technology on the administrative side, particularly around security, right? Particularly around cost. But the questions are different. And I think that it's very important for us to also think about time, particularly on the administrative side. When we can save that time or the time is the delta, there's a lot more that our administrators who are stressed now more than ever
Yeah.
can do with that time.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, Corey, too, we could even expand on bullet two. It's not only limited staff time, but it's fewer staff because a lot of our districts are reducing their staffs. We're seeing it in every headline in every market, reduce staff and higher expectations. So how do we do more with less? That's the real bottom line.
Sure, 100%. Again, that manual remediation is slow and it's hard to sustain. If that is your only solution,
Yeah,
you are not going to be able to do more with less.
yeah.
It's just the bottom line. I wanted to press on this for a second because you heard me mention AI at the outset. There's this thing going on, which is really fascinating, which is as districts start to bring more AI into their administration, particularly into their back office, that AI depends on access to documents for context.
Hmm.
And so if your documents are not readable, what might happen is the AI takes that document as context, but doesn't read it right or doesn't read it at all. I know probably everyone on this call has used something like ChatGPT, where you can go and you can upload a bunch of all of these things and then tell me a little bit more about it. There we go. Okay, so sorry about that, friends. I knew that something was going on upstairs. I'm in the basement now, so I can't see, but whatever it was must have happened. So at any rate, I'm back. Hopefully, I will stay back. What we were talking about was this idea of AI in the context. And so if you've ever used ChatGPT, right, it's like you upload these documents and you'll say to read it and consider it as it's giving you a response. And then it will give you the response. And as you're reading the response, you might say, gosh, like, this is missing something. I know I uploaded this document. And so you'll ask it, hey, did you read this? And it'll say, oh, no, I couldn't access that one, so I just didn't include it. And I think that's the bigger point here is if you're using more of those types of technologies in your back office and you're doing those types of things from a context perspective, your documents have to be accessible so that your investment in technology is sort of worth the time and effort that you're giving it. So anyway, that's something I wanted to point out. I think that's a really important piece that a lot of people kind of aren't talking about right now. But yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or maybe you shared them while I was kind of trying to get back on the.
Yeah, no, I think you did a good job of explaining that for sure. Yeah.
Cool, cool. We can go on to the next one.
Okay, let's see. Hold on, it's not letting me share all of a sudden. Boy, we are just not doing great with our sharing today. Let me get back to the slides. Okay, can you see that? Is it coming back up for
Coming
you?
back up.
Okay. I think our technology is also on summer break, or it's also here we go.
There you go. Yeah, great. Awesome. So, why waiting increases risks even more with time? Again, I mentioned this, like those backlogs are growing every day. I wanted to point out this thing on lawsuits and OCR complaints. Like,
Hmm.
I'm not much of an ambulance chaser. I think like there's a bigger, better argument to be made for all of this, which is that equity piece that we mentioned at the outset. But the reality is those OCR complaints are rising. And in fact, I wrote this down for my last webinar. It's literally still sitting on my desk here. OCR complaints have tripled since 2024. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. I also saw that 40% of them are ADA related.
Yeah.
So, there are people out there, and I was talking to my friends in Colorado, and I don't know if this is happening in Texas yet or not, but districts are receiving what they were calling these $2,500 letters, right? Which is
Hmm.
like, you need to do this or else. And I imagine that same sort of thing is happening in other places across the country. So again, like not much of an ambulance chaser, don't want to be, but like that is something people think about, you know, are we going to have OCR complaints? And if we do, how do we resolve them? I can tell you one of the coolest things about this is that I think time is the great equalizer, right? So if you're able to get back to someone quickly, it's rare that they are going to file an OCR complaint against you if they
Right.
feel that their needs have been met in a reasonable time frame. And so that's what we'll talk about, how you do that. Again, those PDFs, we know they're like the unaddressed trigger sometimes because your website, you might think it's taken care of, right? Your web applications, the vendor that you're paying, who knows what to run those applications is probably taking care of that on the back end. But those PDFs are often uploaded by parents, they're uploaded by staff members, they're uploaded by people who are existing outside of sort of any system of accountability. So it's just important to know that those things need to be cleaned up as well. Of course, that cleanup is going to become more expensive over time. Why is that? Because you're going to have more of it. It's going to require more staff time or more time in general. And so you can just see it's like that I was joking with my wife about like the mountain of clothes when you come home
Yeah.
from vacation. And like if you don't clean it up right away, before you know it, you go on another trip and then the clothes get on top of it. And now you're kind of like trying to figure out how to get it all done in a weekend. Very hard to do.
So true.
Cool. So, manual versus automated. This is interesting, friends. Like just thinking about, okay, I'm leaning into this, right? What does it all cost, right? $5 to $25 a page. This is kind of what it would used to cost when you had a person doing this. And you think, well, one document can have like hundreds of pages. I mean, when you try to do that math, it's like your brain just breaks. It's so much. And so it was just not feasible. So you did what you could. You were often very reactive. The solution we're going to show you and talk about really does bring that cost down much more reasonably to under $1 a page in
Yep.
most cases, significantly under $1 a page in most cases, and really starts to make just the cost piece seem, fairly attainable. So that is useful on its own. Again, that volume is often underestimated. Um, you know, Manual remediation, while good for those reactive things, doesn't necessarily solve for sort of those ongoing workflows in your district. You're only going to do it because it is so expensive and time consuming when you have a problem. But when you can create more of a workflow and an automation process, that frees up time across your system if you do this the right way. It really makes those workflows more efficient. And then, of course, we talked about the delta on staff time. So, V, I don't know if you have any thoughts on those or you want to keep.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think it goes back to the work smarter, not harder thing that we talked about. I think most folks have to drop everything they're doing when a complaint comes in, find the money somewhere in the budget, figure out a solution, and then get back to where they were. And so what we don't spend enough time doing is building processes that prevent all of that. And I think this is exactly the thing we need to spend our summertime doing to prepare for the fall because it's going to come quicker than we realize.
Yeah, and sorry, I realized I put a typo in there. That should say approach a system, not a sprint. That's my finger. That somehow should have been the O and was the I. But at any rate, friends, sorry about that. Scan your environment, right? I think that like this is the piece I really want to mention. Like, have a system, not a sprint. We have some extra time to do this. What it's going to allow us to do, scan our whole environment, take a look at a stock of what we've got,
Yeah.
and then prioritize those high impact documents. Take down the stuff we don't need and set it aside, right? And then start to automate where possible first. This is a big distinction. We're not saying automate everything. And I think that, like, we're going to talk about human in the loop in a second. Automation is great when you use it on the front end of a problem so that you can spend the human resources on the back end of that problem for whatever the delta is, right? And then we're going to monitor continuously. So once we get into that healthy spot, we're able to keep going forward without that laundry pile kind of growing and growing and growing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so automation first. What does that mean? Well, I'm not like a demo guy. I'm not like the tech guy who's gonna pull this up for you. I think I can probably explain it to you based on that picture that you're seeing on the bottom right hand of your screen. This is pretty cool. And like I said, I was a tech reporter for a long time prior to doing this, writing exclusively about ed tech. And I rarely saw a solution that I thought was easy to use. I really do think this is quite easy, and I kind of made the analogy to V of like I feel like it's almost akin to like a virtual printer. Imagine a printer that you had in your office, and when you needed a document, that document would come out. Well, this is a virtual version of that to some degree, except it's doing the accessibility piece. So you have a queue, right? It looks like your standard document queue. You can go in and you can upload a batch, a large batch of documents. You upload it to the queue, you hit a button, it starts to do the processing. You can probably picture this in your head exactly as it happens. Depending on the size of that batch, it's going to take, a few seconds to a couple of minutes usually, and then it's going to give you your documents back.
Hmm.
And when it gives you your documents back, you're also going to get what you see on the bottom left, which is a report. Now, when you go to the emissions station and you have your emissions tested for your car and they give it back to you, it kind of looks a bit like that, except it says like the WCAG standard on it and the percentage to which that document has passed. Almost in all cases, in that level, and we'll talk about the levels in a second, but in that level one, level two, you're going to get 92 to 97%,
Yeah.
which is normally good enough, right, V?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, depending on the document, you're going to be able to determine how much you need it to stand out, and especially when a parent has a complaint or comes to you when you've got this document available and say, "Hey, here's our compliance report for this 300 page document." It gives you some legs to stand on when it comes to someone who is threatening litigation or saying they're going to file a grievance against the district, it gives you something to stand on.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a very useful document. It exists
Hmm.
here in your portal, and you can bring it down. But again, when you're trying to show that good faith effort
Yeah.
and go to someone who's adjudicating a problem, whether that's legally or within your system, otherwise, and you have that documentation, it can be very helpful. And then you'll see on the bottom right, that's the actual document inside the portal. Now
Hmm.
you can go in, or whoever is in charge of the documents can go in, and you can make your own updates to that exact document. So if there are things you want to change or update or get even higher percentage, you can do that right there in the platform, which is very useful. So we say automate first with expert review for complex documents, meaning, take everything that you can, particularly on those board minutes, those policies, the things that are going to run right through and do it. And then for
Hmm.
some of these more complex documents, and I've seen this run with very complex blueprints, which is wild to think that they can get the reading right. Because if you've ever tried to run a blueprint through like an Adobe screen reader, it's chaos.
Oh,
You can't understand
geez.
it.
Right. It's gibberish. And for those of us who have never really spent time trying to remediate a document, we're like, how hard can it be? You explain the photo. Well, sometimes these documents are really, you've got columns, you've got rows, you've got Gantt charts, because in public ed, we do love a good data set, but being able to translate a data set is way more complicated than not.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So, just know that it is automation first, as we said, but it's going to give you the opportunity to, have that expert review as needed. So we're not saying that you're never going to need expert review, and I don't think you'd ever want a situation where you didn't have that available to you. The system that you're looking at, you can go in and it's tokenized, right? So there's a level one, and we'll talk about the cost of these in a second. There's a level one. There's a level two, and then level three is where you might want to pull it out and have some additional remediation as well done to it. What that looks like in practice, again, like scan, right? Identify accessibility gaps across your PDFs, know what you're working with, fix, which means this is the system doing it on its own, automate that tagging, that reading order, which I mentioned, like with the blueprints, right?
Hmm.
Any of that alt text for the images
Hmm.
and then the edge cases and different things like that. So there's a lot of technical stuff that goes on with the remediation of a document that you might not even be thinking about. I know V, as a communications expert, you've probably run into this before, where it's like maybe you think you've made your document accessible only to find that you missed a major piece.
Yeah, and that's so important, especially when we are talking to the community about transparency. And the last thing you need is to be able to make a public statement about how the district is being transparent and we're being inclusive. And then all of a sudden, and I've seen this done on social media, someone says, "Really? Because this document's not in compliance, you guys didn't call me back for this. This information is 2 years old on your website," and they just start giving you artifact after artifact after artifact that demonstrates you're not really being as compliant and efficient and effective as you said you were. So you want to be able to address those things before they start throwing it in your face.
Yeah, I wrote at the bottom here, like, again, human in the loop. My friend JC Bizarre at Digital Promise used that phrase, and I know that some of you others probably have heard that phrase used before. I think it's so important here, right? Automate first to give yourself sort of the bandwidth, choose that human remediation when it's needed, and that process is going to save you time and reduce costs and just, create, I think, better space for you to have conversations with your community members. I think what happens is when you get hung up on inaccessibility, you stop having conversations about
Hmm.
the important things, which are what does it mean to have an accessible document? What are we actually trying to achieve? It's not accessibility. Accessibility is the leverage point, right, to give a student the ability
Hmm.
to learn, to engage, to stay on pace. And so that's what we're trying to achieve. And I
Hmm.
think when we get caught up on the wrong things, those
Yep,
conversations go sideways.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And as a sped mom, I want to make sure that every district has access, and we know that they have an opportunity to look at different tools, and it can be very overwhelming. And I think this solution, especially moving into this next slide here, gets to the bottom line where people are like, "Yeah, but how much does it cost? And how well, whose budget is it going to come out of? Because my fiscal year starts July 1." Those are the conversations we're hearing right now, Corey.
Yep, for sure. It is that time of year, and I know a lot of people are having a lot of hard questions about technology investments in,
Yeah.
again, their schools and their districts. V's going to talk about sort of how you can spread this across your budget, and also, this idea of like, let's have a serious conversation about the difference between the use of this type of technology on the administrative side and what it does versus some of the, more nuanced conversations we need to have about screen time and student use. So
Hmm.
you can see, like, just from a cost perspective, if you're a business administrator, right, put on your business administrator hat for a second. Um, you're going to be paying with this solution. And again, it's tokenized. So it's just as you use it. This is not SaaS. It's not a subscription that you're paying for where you're not using it. When you use it, you're going to pay somewhere in the range of 30 cents to $8 a page. Now, put $8 out of your head for a second. Those are going to be like the most complex
Yeah.
documents where you need to get some of that remediation done. The lion's share of your stuff, 90% of it, is going to be in that 30 to 50% range, that tier one, tier two range that you're going to have within the platform. So, you can see from that five to I forget what it was, 20 some dollars a page, and those numbers go up and down to 30 cents to $8 a page. The difference in cost can be in some cases as much as or more than 90%. Flexible pricing by document type. I mentioned that there are different tiers depending on the document that you use, and so you can get flexible pricing right within the system as you're doing it to know about how much tokens something is going to cost you, and you can just apply those tokens as if you were choosing between the M&Ms or the Cheetos, in the vending machine. And
Yep.
pay only for what you need. Like I said, the tokens roll over. This is not a SaaS-based solution where they're going to have a bunch of features in this thing, and they're not going to be accessible to you. You're not going to know how to use them, and you're going to have to pay this monthly fee. It is a utility. It is tokenized, and you can go in, you can use for what you need, and you can move on. All right, so I want to talk about the communications lens for a second. V, this is your wheelhouse. And I kind of mentioned like, demonstrating the district's commitment to equity and then improving capacity to respond to requests. Those two things I thought you could hit on because I know there's a lot of communications folks in the audience, and this is a big issue. One is just the district's story and how when you're sort of walking the talk or talking the walk or however you say that, right? It's easier, right, to have conversations with people. And then also you're getting a lot of those requests for documents as a communications person or as a school leader. And so how are you able then to say, oh, we've got this covered, right? Those two things alone probably go a long way.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. Anytime a parent files a grievance, and this recently just happened in districts that I'm working in, the parent filed a grievance. They also tagged every media outlet, and all of a sudden, the entire communications team had to redirect their efforts. And I say entire, it was three people, but they had to redirect what it was they were working on to address this pressing need. They had board members calling in, asking the superintendent to issue a statement. The superintendent's reaching out to the comms team to say, what are we doing here? What does it look like? What does it sound like? And so the time the team had to truly prepare for a response was eaten up with all this reactiveness. And so when I put on the communication lens and I look at this issue, it's about preventing so much of that bandwidth being stolen from you.
Yeah.
So when you say you're being transparent, what are you doing to prove that? This is a great tool to do it. How are you improving your capacity? Well, you're making sure you nip this in the bud. When you do get a request, it's addressed quickly. It's not taking 3 or 4 days. You're not having to go get a PO issued to get someone to remediate it. And you're not using outside services. You're doing it in-house. So capacity is the one thing as a communication leader that you need to protect for your team. So when you can protect that bandwidth, you're saving yourself a whole lot of time and headache. And the thing that I see the most, especially for our rural and small districts, is they don't have a dedicated person looking at this issue. So again, the automation is going to get you to step one, step two. You start looping in those humans, and then all of a sudden you're able to address these issues and really avoid some of the headache that might come your way.
Yeah, 100%. Good stuff. So I think we're going to show you in a second, we'll talk about, the priorities and where you could start with this because you're probably asking, like, where do I start? In a second, we're going to throw a QR code up here and we'll send it after the fact to an email, 100 free credits so that you can actually get into this platform. You can use it for yourself with your own documents. We can get on the phone. We can talk about those documents and answer any questions that you might have. But it's a great way to just kind of see this for yourself rather than me trying to sit here and, like I said, fumble through a demo. Just demo it for yourself and take the 100 free credits and demo it for yourself. But where to start? Well, if you want to think about what documents should I pull down to try with this thing? I would say grab some enrollment documents,
Yeah.
grab some of those SPED documents that you know are sort of, an issue, a challenge that you're going to need to have to convert and try them. Board minutes and policies, those are good too. They're often not as complex as some of those SPED documents, so I imagine it'll do those pretty quickly. I would say, like, as you're building your plan, again, we mentioned like you have some time here, right? So, build a plan that's going to give you those front-facing documents first, early wins, build momentum, and build trust with your community. And then you can kind of show them this is our plan for cleaning this stuff up. This is our plan moving forward beyond that. And it's a great way to kind of make sure that you have a plan in place.
Yeah, and Corey, if I can also add too,
Yeah.
when we first started having this conversation a few months ago, I had one comms director get some credits, and they had a lot of success, were able to remediate those documents, and then they reported it in their quarterly report to the school board. They talked about what they were doing, so they publicly said to the board, hey, this is important. We know this deadline's coming up. This is the steps that we've already taken. This is how it's working. And the comms department got a nice pat on the back. And there was a very vocal board member who was usually very critical of what the communications team did, but also was a sped mom. Give them a nice accolade and praised their work for being proactive and getting ahead of this. So there's a lot of wins here when you do this right.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Low risk starting point, right? So a couple of things again I mentioned. I'll show you the QR code in a second. We've got a couple of things. So we've got that 100 free credits, which I mentioned. We also can do sort of a readiness diagnostic for you. It's like a short survey that you can take just to kind of see like where are you at in this process. And then of course we can do a demo. We can align it with your workflow, or our friends at AOD and ArtScan can do the demo and align it with your workflow. And then we can also help you take stock of what you have in your universe to kind of see about where you should start and what your initial investment should be. So low risk for everyone. Again, I'm seeing this as an opportunity. I hope you guys are too. It was just like when we first started this, we wanted to help spread the word, and we knew the deadline was coming up quick. And, it was difficult because people say, we don't have time for this. We barely even knew or heard about this. And now
Yeah.
it's coming in like 3 months. So yeah, we're interested in learning about this because we're interested in equity, right? But like we're, as sort of a time-bound thing, we have other things that we need to also worry about. So we're just going to take what comes. I think that this extra time gives everybody an opportunity to do this responsibility, from this big growing backlog of stuff that you've had to an actual system for getting this done, not only up to the deadline, but a real workflow that has a just continuous way to keep documents accessible for your community, right? The solution that we talked about, I mean, you can see in the numbers that is going to reduce your long-term cost on this 100%. You
Mhm.
will get cost benefit from this. Support staff and students more effectively. I think we've talked about what that looks like and what it means. Also, I should mention parents and community members as well. And then again, just building a system that's going to be sustainable for you over time so that this thing becomes like the printer in your office. When you need it, you can use it. Be anything to say with that as well?
Yeah, I was just going to add that now is the time. Now's the time to practice before everyone leaves for the 4th of July. Let's
Yeah.
load up these documents. Let's tell people what you're doing and then write it in your SOP.
Yeah.
Make sure you train people on how to use it. It's really important to give other people access.
Yeah, we'll leave this QR code up here for a second. I know there's a few folks on the call that might want to scan it. Again, I'll also send a link out in the email after the fact, assuming you're checking your email. I know it's, like I said, early summer. We were just at the pool all day yesterday with my family. I know some people are probably looking to do summer stuff, but you will have this in your email. You also have it here. Again, like B said, good time of year to just get in there and try it. See if this is something that could work for you based on the scale that you're envisioning and start to formulate a plan because you have a little bit of time. And if you start now, I think, that's going to get you there. But if you kind of wait and that laundry pile grows, you might find yourself back where we were just a couple short months ago. So anyway, V, I just want to say thank you to you. Sorry about my little internet hiccup there. I knew that was potentially going to be a problem. Fortunately, V was here to rescue the day. So thank you. Thanks everyone for talking with us and for sitting here and just sharing a little bit more about the solution. I hope you see this as an opportunity with the deadline being extended. We're going to do more of these. I know you're probably sick of receiving emails from us about this, but as the summer goes on, we'll do a couple more just to give people awareness around this topic. And we're available to you if you want to have conversations. I'd say start with getting those documents, see how this thing works, and then the folks on this call. And then our friends at ArtScan and AOD can help you formulate a plan so that as this deadline gets closer, you are in position to both support your students and your community members with equitable access to documentation, and to be in compliance. Win-win.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, B. Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone. We'll talk again real soon. Have a great summer.
Thank you.